Alright, so this is the second video in the Return of the Heroes, and this starts on the saga of Odysseus. The main thing to keep in mind is that Odysseus was away for 10 years for the war at Troy, and it took him 10 years to get home. So his adventures are going to be much more involved getting home than the other heroes. So first of all, his departure from Troy and his adventure with the Cacones. We'll start with that. So after Odysseus left Troy, he first came to Ismarus, the land of the Cacones. Odysseus and his men sacked the town and divided up the booty from the town fairly. Odysseus then, according to his account given later, gave orders to leave, but his men were anxious to stay and feast. The Cacones, in the meantime, rallied back up with troops who had chariots from inland and launched a surprise attack. In a large battle by the ships, Odysseus and his men fought valiantly, but as the battle dragged on, the Cacones broke their defensive line, and Odysseus lost 6 men from each of his ships before they finally fled. Now, while they were in the land of the Cacones, they encountered Marin, who was a priest of Apollo, and when they spared his life, he gave them the gift of wine in return for sparing his life. Now, that's going to be important a little bit later on, okay? Once they leave the harbor of Ismarus, a storm ends up driving them south. And when they go south, Odysseus and his men wind up in the land of the Lotus Eaters. Odysseus sends out a scouting party of 3 men who end up eating the lotus leaves with the natives. Now, the lotus have an effect on people, and the lotus leaves cause the men to stop caring about going home, or basically anything else other than eating more lotus leaves. Odysseus goes after the scouting party and drags them back to the ship against their will. He sets sail with the drugged sailors tied to their own rowing benches to prevent them from jumping overboard and swimming back to the island. So, that is the Lotus Eaters. Their next stop is in the land of the Cyclops. All right, so this is their next stop. They land on an island that is full of goats, and within earshot is the title of the the territory of the Cyclops. So this is a group of Cyclopses, not the 3 Titan ones that we've learned about at the very beginning of the semester, but this is like a whole civilization of Cyclops. Drawn by the sounds of civilization, Odysseus sails over to the island with a single ship on which he takes 12 men with him as a scouting party. When he gets there, he enters a cave, and he doesn't realize until it's too late that the cave is the dwelling place of the Cyclops Polyphemus. The Cyclops Polyphemus is a son of Poseidon, so that's going to be important later on. Polyphemus comes back to his cave, and he discovers his uninvited guests, and breaking the rules of hospitality, he traps them in his cave by blocking the entrance with a boulder that could not be moved by mortal men. He then proceeds to eat a pair of Odysseus's men at each meal. So again, it's not very hospitable. Odysseus ends up devising a cunning plan, however. He and his men turn the olive tree branch that Polyphemus uses to shepherd his flocks. If you remember, shepherds are depicted with that shepherd hook. Well, Polyphemus is so huge that his shepherd hook is an entire tree branch. And they basically take this tree and they fashion it into a giant spear while Polyphemus is out of the cave. To lower Polyphemus's guard when he comes back, Odysseus gives him some of the strong wine given to them by Marin. Now, this is very strong wine they would normally water down. So they give him the unwatered version. And when Polyphemus becomes completely drunk off of it, Odysseus tells him his name is No Man, because Polyphemus asks, "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" And he says his name is No Man. Now, that's not what he says. He said the Greek version of it, which was not necessarily a lie, because there is kind of a version of his own name, Odysseus, that does sound kind of like that. Well, in thanks for the wine, Polyphemus very generously offers to eat Odysseus last. And once the giant falls asleep, Odysseus and his men drive their specially fashioned spear through his single eye and blind him. Hearing Polyphemus's cries, the other Cyclops of the island call up to his cave to ask him what's wrong, and Polyphemus cries out something like, "No man is killing me." And so the other Cyclops let him be, thinking that he's either crazy or, maybe it's just the will of the gods that he's going to die. In the morning, Polyphemus rolls back the boulder to let his sheep out to graze, but since he's blind now, he can't see the men and make sure they don't get out, so he feels the tops of his sheep to make sure the men are not riding them to get out, and he spreads his arm at the entrance of the cave to make sure they can't, only the sheep can get past. Odysseus and his 6 remaining men escape by tying themselves to the undersides of 3 sheep each, and once out, they load those sheep aboard their ship and set sail. Polyphemus, this is not the end, we're at Polyphemus's prayer. As Odysseus and his men are sailing away, Odysseus, perhaps this hubris problem that a lot of our heroes have, just can't resist letting Polyphemus know who outsmarted him. So he reveals his true identity to Polyphemus, and enraged, Polyphemus tries to sink the ship with boulders, but he misses because he's blind, right? But the rocks do land close enough to the ship to rock it. When the ships appear to be getting away at last, Polyphemus raises his arms to his father Poseidon and asks him not to allow Odysseus to get back home to Ithaca. If this could not be granted, however, he must arrive alone, his crew dead, and in a stranger's ship. So, spoiler alert, it's not Odysseus's fate to die on his journey home, so, the latter is going to be what happens. He has to arrive home alone, his crew dead, and in a stranger's ship. So they're finally back on course to get back to Ithaca and back to their homes. And along the way, they make another stop at Aeolia, which is the island home of Aeolus, the mortal man who was favored by the gods enough to be given the power of controlling the winds. Aeolus gives Odysseus and his crew hospitality for 1 month, and in return for Odysseus's interesting stories. He's by himself on an island, there's no Netflix, so this is his best entertainment for a while. Aeolus also provides a bag filled with all the winds except one, the wind which would lead him home. That's going to be important. All right. So he gives him a bag filled with all the winds except for the one that would lead him home. And because Odysseus, once they leave, guards the bag for the entire journey home without so much as a wink of sleep, his crew suspects that some treasure must be inside it. They decide to open it as soon as he falls asleep, just before their home was reached. So basically, their home is right there on the horizon. They've almost made it. They open the bag of winds, and immediately they're blown back to Aeolia by a violent storm. Aeolus refused to offer any more help because he realized that Odysseus must be cursed by the gods, and so Odysseus had to begin his journey from Aeolia to Ithaca all over again. Oh, so close. But then it wouldn't have taken 10 years. All right. So, the next stop. They land in at the island of the Lastrygonians. Odysseus' ship enter a harbor surrounded by steep cliffs with a single entrance between two headlands. This is actually not an uncommon island feature in the Mediterranean. Thank you, Discovery Channel. But anyway, the captains of two of the ships took their ships inside and made them fast close to one another where it was dead calm. Odysseus, on the other hand, keeps his own ship outside the harbor, moored to a rock. He could see nothing but some smoke rising from over the horizon, so he sent... Okay, sorry, phone call. So I had to pause here, so I don't remember exactly where I left off. Odysseus keeps his own ship outside the harbor, moored to a rock, and since he could see nothing but some smoke rising over the horizons, he sends two of his company with an attendant to investigate the inhabitants. So the men in the scouting party followed a road and eventually met a young woman who said she was the daughter of the king and directed them to his house. When they arrived there, however, they found a gigantic woman, the wife of the queen, the queen, all right, who promptly called her husband. He immediately left the assembly of the people and, on arrival, snatched up one of the men and started to eat him. So these are giants, these Lastrygonians, okay? Apparently giants do really like to eat people. Anyway, the other two ran away, but one of the men raises a big cry, and soon they were pursued by many Lastrygonians, men who had the strength of giants, who threw vast rocks from the cliffs and smashed the ships. And they also could spear the men like fish. So Odysseus escapes with one ship due to the fact that it was the only one that was not trapped within the harbor. The rest of his company is lost. So now Odysseus is down to one ship with its crew. The next stop, the island of Aea. This is the island home of the enchantress Circe, or Kirke. That would be the Greek way of pronouncing it. Circe is what you tend to hear more in popular culture. Okay, so Odysseus once again sends ahead a scouting party, and Kirke invites the scouting party in for a meal. However, they are served food that is laced with one of her magical sleeping-inducing potions, and when they fall asleep, she transforms all the men into swine. Only the leader of the scouting party suspected treachery from the outset and escaped because he didn't eat, and was able to warn Odysseus and the others who had stayed back with the ships. Odysseus, against this lone survivor's advice, sets forth to rescue his transfigured men, but he is intercepted by Hermes and told to procure the herb Molly, which would protect him from a similar fate. When the herb neutralizes her magic, Odysseus threatens to kill Circe. She begs for mercy and offers to sleep with him. He forced her to swear not to plot against him any longer, then, obliged by Hermes, if not to plot against him any longer, obliged by Hermes' counsel to do so. He then refused to eat and drink until his crew was turned back into humans. When she had done this, she asked Odysseus to stay, and he does stay for an entire year. He eventually leaves Aea at the insistence of his crew. Circe agreed that it was time for him to go and gave him advice about the remainder of his journey. During the preparation for departure, however, Odysseus's youngest crewman, Elpenor, fell from a roof and died. So that is going to be kind of important in this next step. Now, it's important to note that for the year that Odysseus stays on the island with Circe, he is not faithful to his wife. He sleeps with her on more than one occasion, and in fact, they have a son together. And that's going to be important at the very, very end of the tale. Okay. So, the next part, the Nicaea of Odysseus. So, based on his counsel from Circe, Odysseus decides that he needs to talk to Tiresias. He is a seer, but unfortunately he's dead. So he and his men journey to the river Acheron in Hades, where they perform sacrifices which allow them to speak to the dead. Now, remember that a descent into the underworld is significant because that is the conquest of a most formidable struggle a hero can survive and return from, and that is the conquest of death. Now, Aeneas, in his parallel adventure after the fall of Troy to the founding of Rome, also travels into the underworld. However, there is a difference. Odysseus only goes to the entrance, where they are able to perform a sacrificial rite and attract the dead to them. Aeneas, on the other hand, passes through the entrance of the underworld, actually goes into the underworld and finds the dead that he wants to talk to. So, difference in the enactment of that symbolic quest. Okay? So, Odysseus sacrifices a ram, as I said, which attracts the spirits of the dead to the blood. He holds them at bay and demands to speak with Tiresias, who told him how to pass by Helios's cattle and the whirlpool-causing monster Charybdis. Tiresias also told him that after his return to Ithaca, he must take a well-made oar and walk inland with its parts to where no one mixed sea salt with food, until someone asks him why he is carrying a winnowing fan. And at that place he must fix the oar in the ground and make a sacrifice to appease Poseidon. Tiresias also told Odysseus that after that was done, he would die an old man, full of years and peace of mind. His death would come from the sea, and his life ebb away gently. Now, some people would read that last little part as saying that his death would be away from the sea, as opposed to out at sea, which we will see how that resolves itself. While in the underworld, Odysseus meets Achilles, who told him that he would rather be a slave on earth than the king of the dead. He also meets Agamemnon, because he's met his unhappy fate by this point. He also meets his own mother. The soul of Ajax is also met in the underworld, and he is still sulking about Achilles' armor and refuses to speak to Odysseus, despite Odysseus's pleas of regret to Ajax. Odysseus also meets his dead comrade Elpenor, remember, who fell off of a roof and died before they left Circe's place, and he told him of the manner of his death and begged him to go back and give him an honorable burial. So, we're going to wind up going back to Aea and see Kirke one more time. And we'll pick up there in the next video.